certain things in art are very seductive, right? Like a cadmium red. When you stop trying to really pursue something and you just fall into a routine, it's when the art dies.
Do you think the public actually has the ability to differentiate what good art is?
It's the Mona Lisa, right? It's like that kind of conundrum. Everyone crowds around the Mona Lisa, when I think like Bruegel's Three Blind Men are way more interesting than the Louvre. It's good to be aware of it, that a painting's value solely based on the name of what it is, not based on anything more than that, is difficult. I see my work as painting even when it's sculptural because I navigate it through the sense of exploring space. Trying to figure out where we are in this world. You learn a lot about it from looking at our past, for better or worse. I just started laughing and I thought it was wonderful that you could make something that has a reaction. What's allowed modern art to be modern art is because it became untethered from its obligation to society as a representation of life. The world has always been ending, you know, and we keep on living. I'm David Meyers. I'm an artist. I do painting, drawing, and sculpture, as well as woodworking.
What is the reason for the choice of like LED lights?
The reason for the choice of LED lights, when I go to make pieces like with the LED neon, and I have some like the one over there which just has LED, like a illuminated piece. And like I said, I've got a whole series of work of these light boxes that are at the Cahoon Museum on the Cape. I guess those are a little different, so I'll leave those out of it. It's just a way of activating the space and creating movement in a sort of drawing aspect. And it's like using certain things in art are very seductive, right? Like a cadmium red, or like the certain colors. I mean, painters will talk about like, I mean, for me, like you make paintings to use a color, or something like that. And for me, in that seduction, the material you always need to be careful of. So with the LEDs, it's a way of activating the space. And each one is different in like how I kind of see it go, but it adds something to it that connects it and broadens it, and it just, I don't know, it just kind of makes sense. Like I said, I see my work as painting even when it's sculptural because I navigate it through the sense of exploring space. And I think those painterly framework are what make my work interesting, because a lot of it's just me struggling to think in the third dimension, in 3 dimensions, you know?
Yeah.
But for example, like this piece over here, I'm backing up my little Ford Ranger, and long story short, I lived in an apartment and I hit something, and I hit a little bit of a wooden stair, and it broke my rear tail light. And I was just looking at it and I was imagining this red, you know, the red of the tail, and what if like there was like a force coming out of it. And when I made this piece and that other automobile related piece, having like, you know, old cars, until recently I've been driving a 96 Ranger, and you spend a lot of time working on it because, you know, I don't have a lot of money, you know, I'm a starving artist, right? So, and I kind of like got this romantic imagination. I was like, what if, you know, like cavemen and like cars, right? And that kind of like a little Fred Flintstone, Ooga Booga. But I started thinking about the tail light and like this kind of force leaving it, like this, the potential energy and the kinetic energy of when it turns on, and imagining this, you know, red is coming out of it, and there's a material shift, right? Where you're thinking about fluid, or you know, fluid as in like physical, like the like something leaking out of the tail light, like that essence, but also just kind of a shift. And it does something that I'm still learning. I'm still learning about it. I've been working with the LED neon since probably like 2000, and it didn't start like making an art piece. It was like I wanted to I was familiar with this material and working with LEDs with other projects, And I was like, oh, cool, that looks cool. I'll try that. And then I was like, oh shit, that's a good idea. I'll see that through. And for me, it was like a sense of play and like mimicking a material and switching it up a little bit. But it ended up kind of activating something more. And then you learn from that, these material shifts. And a lot of times in my studio, like if I'm like kind of like getting ideas together, I'll put one thing next to another thing and I'll see how they interact, and I'll see kind of what happens. Because when you start like this kind of additive forces, you never know. I mean, like you look at like Dadaism, right? And you shift the framework, and it can really change a lot. Like for example, this piece, I was thinking about this clash of like technology. I did this one. I was working. I don't work in antique repair now. I miss it, but working with a lot of old things and working with lighting and the idea of candles and fire hazards, and doing a little bit of a historical time travel mashup. And I often have references to history within my work because it's what interests me. But also that sense of trying to figure out where we are in this world. You learn a lot about it from looking at our past, for better or worse. I also really like the movement in this piece, and I've noticed that that's something that I don't think about inherently when I start the work, but it's something that I value.
What aspect do you choose to keep more abstract, and what aspect do you choose to keep more like realistic?
I would say that from like a communicating perspective, like there would be the idea of a hierarchy of like value, where like in olden times, the king is the biggest and like the peasants are the smallest. So you would think that like what you would want to have be more legible is more important. I would say that the process of it is kind of what dictates it. And just seeing how it works, because you do want it to be legible, but you don't want it to be hand-holding. And so, for example, like the piece over there, like the pendants of the past, like I wanted the pendants to be more clear, but the framework around it was less important. But it does contextualize it all, and so I'm trying to understand this piece as I'm making it. And I had a lot of fun making it. I just kind of got like a mild hair, and I was like, I want to do this. And so I'm seeing it through, and I knew I wanted to use like an epoxy modeling clay to make these things and kind of have it be a little tongue-in-cheek. But then understanding, well, why am I thinking of this? And working in carpentry, and working in somebody's underneath their home, and it's like an old colonial home, and I'm digging up pottery shards, and I'm doing like this little archaeological excavation, and I'm thinking about how like cities do like public works projects, and then they find like a Viking burial or like something really like, oh wow, look. And that relationship with what we find in the past, and like kind of our little digging up, and not to say like progress, but just like our own industry. And then I have like this kind of like the earth around it, and like the utility line kind of mimic, and like the kind of layers of that, and the people. And so you use it to kind of create a structure around it, because it's not just like this thing, but it's more of a story. But I don't see it as like very like heavy on the narrative, because then you have to understand every part of it, but rather just like a little bit. I used to think of it as kind of like a bad joke or something like that, but it's something that can engage me long enough. Or like sometimes I make like that little like golf ball thing, which is like the guy hunting the T-Rex with the legs. And I made a whole bunch of work about golf, and I've got no clue, because I thought it was a really good idea, but I've never played a game of golf in my life. But I learned from it. I learned that maybe because I got stuck in traffic around a PGA tour, I shouldn't make a whole body of work around it. It's more to it than that. I wanted to see it through, and I did. And it helped me learn more about the work I make now. Oh, those skulls are so much fun. I made these, so most of the work, it's 2026 now.
Yep.
So the majority of the work here I either made when I was living back in Boston during COVID, but this stuff I made while I was in graduate school. And I was at this weird moment in graduate school. I kind of had a tough time in graduate school. I mean, nobody has an easy time if you're like really trying to figure it out, because you're like, what am I doing? I can make so much. What am I going to focus on? And I had this moment, and I was looking at a lot of Josh Smith's work, and he just does like these kind of like stupid things and like a little self-deprecating, and he's like, that's just it. And I love skulls, and I've always drawn skulls from a kid. I have a whole bunch of skulls on that wall. And it's kind of been a repeating form. And I was like, what if I just did a series of like the worst skulls, just like the worst fucking skulls. And just like with spray paint and really loose. And I was like, how much does it need to be a skull? And I made this whole big series, and I just like, thrown them about. It ended up being really great work. And I like laid it all out, and I just started laughing. And I thought it was wonderful that you could make something that has a reaction, right? It's like when people want to touch something, it's like, you can't do that. But it comes from a place where they have a reaction that's strong. And I think it's wonderful to connect with people on that kind of a level, because that's what it's all about. Like, because you could ask like, well, why show your work? Why do you want to do and not just keep it to yourself? But there's something within. I show somebody else because we're all living in it together. But I made these drawings and paintings, and I really liked the feeling behind it, the energy behind it. The works on the wall now, like the drawings and stuff, like though they are loose, they are a little bit tighter than what some of my older work was. And I had a lot of times you have like an exhibition, and you're looking at all of the work in a room, and you reflect on it, and you think about like what you like and what you don't like. And I realized that really the linchpin of my practice is drawing. And that's what holds it all together, and that's where I'm happiest doing it. And I love to paint, but in that drawing, and I think within these, it really kind of came back to that drawing. Yeah. I think, but I mean, I still love them. And it's nice to see, because when you make art, you see things from the different years, and there you're all in your same head, so you communicate with those ideas. In my studio, there's a mix of like my capital A art, but also things I do just to like pay the bills, because I believe switching it up keeps things fresh. And oftentimes I'll do like 2 months of just drawings, or 2 of this, and then I'll go to something else, and I'll kind of change it a little bit, so you don't get when you stop trying to really pursue something and you just fall into a routine, it's when the art dies. And it's that sense of kind of exploration is what makes it fun. So these are like how I kind of keep the lights on in my studio. I carve whales out of reclaimed wood for my day job, and I take a whale and I stretch it as far as I can, and I make it as weird as I want. And I've got traditional ones, and I've got squiggly ones, and I sell them because they sell themselves in Bedford, Moby Dick, but they people buy them, and I make a little bit of money on them, and it goes right into the studio to keep this space running, because it's wonderful to have a space to be creative like this, because it allows. But I started doing it on a whim. The first one I made was the big one, because why make a small one? Just make a really fucking big whale. And so I was at my fiance's house, and I said, you need a 76-inch whale. And I ended up making it, and then I decided to make a smaller one. I got a lot of really positive feedback. And so I've been making whales for like 3 years now, and I haven't gotten sick of it, which I think is pretty cool, because if you don't like to do something, you'll get sick of it. And I keep on finding something new to explore. And I have fun with them. Oh boy. This is a commissioned piece from a good friend, family friend. And so it's a little bit bigger than I usually make them. And I've been trying to figure out this. So then I'm scatterbrained. I got a lot of things going on in my mind. You can tell it by my studio. So when it gets time, and even like I'll work on multiple pieces at once, painting, sculpture. When it comes time to finish something, you finish that one piece. So because I was neglecting my whales, I had to come back and do it, because summer's, the time when the tourists come up and the whales sell. But it's, I do enjoy making them, and if I didn't like it, I wouldn't do it. No. But I realized that when I was looking at my practice, that I enjoyed the sketch, or the kind of a more loose-hand approach to the work, and I was trying to capture those moments. And it took me I keep in touch with, the professors that I like, or like the old professors, and Donna Nelson, who's just a gem of a human and a wonderful artist. She was like, David, your work's great, but your drawings are what it's really about. And she was right. And I learned a lot from that, because, just because you can do something doesn't mean you want to do it, And so I love to draw, and sometimes it's easy to have a hierarchy when it comes to drawing versus painting. I mean, historically, what do you see on the walls of museums? Paintings. And, you get etchings too, don't get me wrong, works on paper have their place, but drawing has had more of a resurgence, which is really cool, because drawings, there's an intimacy with drawing because you see that mark on the paper, and it conveys a lot more with the weight than it might not in painting. As a painter, if you're making looser paintings and you don't put a ground color and it's just white, and you think you have some really cool moves, but then it's just a white background, and you're like, is this the space I want to do? Is this being lazy or not? But with the drawing, you don't think like, oh shit, it's a white background. It's like, oh yeah, of course it's a white background. It's on a white piece of paper. And I think so there's an interesting relationship, and plenty of people, they'll like paint their drawings. I guess they don't draw their paintings. Well, you do. But there is a shift that happens within that, as it's not about getting heightened, it's about getting kind of transformed, retranslated. I don't know, it's interesting. I mean, there's such a beauty in the communication of the visual language, and what you can do with it. And I just think it's really special. And it's not always, it's like hard days, you get frustrated, you're like, dude, come on, why isn't this working? I'm not feeling it today. But you just try to like learn yourself a little bit. That's why it's like, you try to be your own therapist, your own this, your own that, you try to explain it. But at the end of the day, you're doing it, and that's what it comes down to, is like, you're doing the work. And I'm like, hey, like, I really like this Howard Pyle print. I'm going to draw it myself and kind of see what's going on there and see how I relate to it, and like take it from there. And I try to do more drawing because it grounds you, but it's a lot of sketch notes and stuff, but it's a way to think through ideas and to kind of, it works better when you think it through generally. I think of myself as a painter because I studied painting in undergraduate and in graduate school as well. But my kind of path there was a little less direct. I didn't always know that I wanted to be an artist. And on a whim, I took a painting class, and I fell in love with it in undergrad at Temple University. And that was really special, but nothing comes from nothing. It did come from somewhere, and I had always been doodling and working like that. So I studied painting, and I loved making big oil paintings. I was really into making these paintings of Revolutionary War dioramas, and I really loved doing it. And none of them are in here. That was a decade ago. I loved oil paint and just exploring its expressive qualities, as well as drawing. And ultimately, I ended up going to graduate school at the University of Iowa, and I worked in oil paint, and then I went back to work in acrylic and make these loose and more gestural paintings, always very large. And over time, your interests kind of change, and there's so many things I want to do, and I don't have that much time to do it because I have to work a full-time job to afford this. But and I work as a carpenter, and that does impact my practice. While I was studying in undergrad, I was in the wood shop a lot, and I had spent a lot of time in the wood shop in high school, and so it kind of brought it all together. And now working with materials and that sort of multimedia aspect, it makes my tail wag.
What are you trying to express in your work?
That's like a big question. It's like the human experience. Well, my human experience, maybe. It's ultimately what do you make, right? And when I would teach and I'd ask my students, you make a drawing, and they'd make a drawing of whatever's in front of them or the things in their dorm room. And then when you have to get like bigger and bigger and bigger, you have to think about like, well, what am I interested in? And what do I gravitate towards? So what am I trying to express? I'm trying to make the art that I want to see in this world. And it's not the art that needs to be seen, but I try to make something that excites me. And I don't always know what the end result's going to be, but for me, my art is rooted a lot in humor. And it deals with history and kind of merging just a way of kind of like looking at this world and being like, hey, not all art needs to be about really shitty things or like hot naked chicks. It can be about the screws in my pocket. You know, it can be about sitting in your underwear and drinking a beer. There's a lot more that can be expressed within art. I think that, you know, there's all this like back and forth about artist statements and like, what is it about? And there are some people that they talk so polished about their work and then the work doesn't really show it. And I feel like you get so successful, somebody else talks about your work and you're like, yeah. But I think in my work that there's this drive to have a sense of play and a sense of navigating. I see working in multimedia as kind of an expanded mark making within painting. And so when I used to make those brushier paintings, now I still approach the same canvas, the same surface, in a way where a piece of wood or something like that can act in place of a brushstroke.
So you would say like the visual quality a art portrays is more impactful than the meaning it conveys?
No, not at all. They're inseparable. But it's like what do you expect somebody? How educated should a viewer be when they go
do you think
see the work?
Piece of art should be directed to like the elite class, or should it make everyone happy?
The notion of like the art being directed to the elite class comes a lot from the art market and also just proclivities within society where some people might be less inclined to engage with the museum. With the rise of conceptual art as well as pop art in that post-war time, I believe it drove a wedge between the American public. I'm saying this as an American, so I mean I do have my own. I got my own lenses on it. It is my viewpoint, but I feel like it drove kind of a wedge in the public, and where they kind of like, oh, my child can do that or something like that. But art is beautiful. Art is what makes us human, and there is so much within, you know, the world of creation and what it means to be alive. And I find that there's a lot of spirituality in art, and I feel that as I've gotten older and less of like a snotty little punk, I can embrace a lot more. I can see an art in many different things. And I just hope that other people, you know, are open to kind of viewing stuff. It's about a give and a take. You know, you go to a museum, there's so much work on the walls. You know, what do you decide to look at? You know, and there's a lot of work on these walls, but I do feel that people they stop and they look and they kind of engage with something, and that's what it's about. It's about making like you want to make something meaningful, but you understand the meaning a lot more after the work or before the work started than during in the middle of it, because you're still constructing that meaning. Art is valid for everybody. I stand at my easel or my workshop and I make my things, and that's the same thing as Rembrandt, you know, sitting in there painting his painting. It's the same thing as a caveman, you know, Ooga Booga, making his cave drawings, and those are beautiful, and there's so much there. And I love you know, cave people art. I think it's great, and I think that it ties us back to what the human experience is. And their drawings are fucking good. They observe, and then we have this whole history of, you know, the Western canon of art, and it took us like 6,000 years to go from a caveman painting a bull with 6 legs to a cubist rendition of, you know, more limbs than are there. I think it's really interesting. We almost shunt ourselves.
When going into a museum, people have the tendency, or at least like what I'm seeing, like people have the tendency to gather around like works that are relatively more renowned than works that are less. So do you think the public actually has the ability to differentiate what good art is?
Can we be free thinkers? Can we have our own opinion? I think it is sometimes difficult when there are fashions, and when if somebody says like that tree is worth $1 million, people will go to see that tree. That's the Mona Lisa, right? It's like that kind of conundrum. Everyone crowds around the Mona Lisa, when I think like Bruegel's Three Blind Men are way more interesting in the Louvre. But people are always drawn to that, and that is the spectacle. It's a spectacle. And it can be frustrating, right? It can skew the logic of it. Look at what art is very popular in museums now. It's like the immersive art, the art you can take a selfie with, the Kusama Infinity Rooms, things like that. And I think that they are marketing towards the spectator, the Van Gogh 3D, whatever it is, woo. And it's an experience, and people have always been interested in that. I mean, see the bearded lady, see the world's tallest man. It's kind of a little bit like that. But I do believe that it could draw them into something more. I think it's good to be aware of it, that a painting's value solely based on the name of what it is and not based on anything more than that is difficult. Vermeers are gorgeous. They're beautiful paintings. And the Nazis in World War II, people were forging Vermeers that did look nothing like Vermeer, but before we had color photographs and such documentation to show art that they didn't know. And so you got to wonder, like, well, how could they not know? They were so focused on it as a value commodity. Because the role of art changes within societies. And that's what's allowed modern art to be modern art, is because it became untethered from its obligation to society as a representation of life. And once that became untethered, then it could become everything. So these values are always changing, and it's hard for us to relate back to the prior places from which these images came, because we will always fundamentally not be a part of that. I will never be able to truly understand what the cavemen meant, but I can try. You can say that about a lot of art.
What do you think about Dadaism?
Dadaism is wonderful. I mean, things come out of nothing comes from nothing. Something comes from something. It came from this time of chaos in the world, and it's incredibly impactful, and it has very much so. I mean, you think about Duchamp and all of these ways of trying to make sense in such a crazy, crazy world. The world has always been ending, and we keep on living. And there's some beauty in it. Art gave me a lot of understanding in life. And I think in relating through the years with that, do you have specific questions on Dadaism? I think it's a wonderful movement. I think, sometimes it's difficult for people to latch on to certain movements, right? Like, for example, Rococo art, Watteau. He does the embarkation from Scythia. He does a lot of the Fête Gallant, these kind of, it's like the French aristocracy. I think it's before the Revolution, and it's the kind of foofy scenes. And how do you relate to a foofy scene? I mean, I'm a blue-collar carpenter, But I love the imagination with it, and there is something so much more that happens. I think that different movements all have something of value. You don't have to like it, and your sense of art changes so much. Your taste changes so much. The painters that I loved when I first was cutting my teeth are different than the painters I love now. But it all is kind of what relates to you. But Dada came out of a time and a place, which makes it so unique out of this crisis. And what can I say? The Germans make some good art.